There was a Pueblo Indian girl who was different from all the other girls in her village. She was different because she had no interest in young men. If she was grinding corn in the evening and young men would come and stand outside the window and try to start a conversation, she wouldn't answer any of their questions. She would never go to the spring for water with groups of girls so that they could stop and talk to the groups of boys on the way back into the village. She went silently to the spring. She returned without talking to anyone. She never participated in any of the games or dances where young people would meet each other. Her parents didn't understand her. They wanted her to get married and give them grandchildren the way other young women her age were beginning to do. But they could not complain about her. She was a hard-working girl. Her mother made clay water jars, and the girl would help her mother by preparing the clay. She would grind dry clay with her grinding stones till it was as fine as flour. And then she would add water and a little bit of sand and bits of ground up old pottery until it was almost the right consistency. And then she would turn it over and over with her foot, kneading the clay until it was just right to be built into a water jar. Well, the girl's old mother would gather her clay near a spring that was close to the village. And one morning she was walking down to the spring, and she was thinking about how her daughter had no interest in young men, and how it seemed as though she would never get married and give her any grandchildren. And the spirit that lived in the water of the spring heard the woman's thoughts. He placed a seed of life in the clay she was gathering. Later that day, the daughter was preparing the clay. She was rolling it over and over with her foot, and the clay splashed up her leg. The seed of life entered her, and a child began to grow inside her. In time, she gave birth to her baby. But it was not a human baby. It was a clay pot. The girl's mother was embarrassed. She said, "Oh no, what will the people say? Our daughter has given birth to a clay pot." But when the girl's father returned home, he was happy. He said, "Good, now I will have a grandson to train in the ways of our people. We'll call him Claypot Boy." Claypot Boy didn't have any arms or any legs, but he had an opening at the top, and they fed him through that opening. He grew so fast that in just 20 days, he could join in the games with boys who were 10 or 12 years old. He didn't have any legs to run with, but he could roll along as fast as any of those boys could run. And they were happy to include him in their games. And then one evening in the fall of the year, as the grandfather sat telling Claypot Boy the stories of their people, a light snow began to fall. And Claypot Boy said, "Grandfather, take me rabbit hunting tomorrow. You've always told me that the best time to hunt rabbits is the morning after a light snow." His grandfather said to him, "You can't hunt rabbits. You don't have any arms to shoot a bow with." But Claypot Boy told his grandfather, "I could roll ahead and chase the rabbits from their hiding places. I'll drive them back towards you, and then you can shoot them." So the next morning, before the sun came up, Clay Pot Boy and his grandfather set out to hunt rabbits. Before long, they saw rabbit tracks in the fresh snow. Clay Pot Boy rolled away, following those rabbit tracks. He rolled up a hill and he started rolling down the other side. But as he rolled downhill, he began to gather more and more speed. And at the bottom of the hill, there was a large rock. He struck that rock and shattered into pieces. And then up from the broken chips of pottery stood a fine, handsome-looking young man. He touched his legs and his arms in surprise, and then he shrugged his shoulders and he ran off following the rabbit track. And he caught that rabbit. And then he picked up another trail and he caught another rabbit. He caught several more, and then he thought he'd better go back and find his grandfather. He found the old man sitting on the rock, surrounded by the broken chips of pottery. He walked up to him and said, "Hello, grandfather." His grandfather didn't recognize him. He thought he was just a polite boy who was calling an old man grandfather. The grandfather said to him, "Have you seen my grandson? Have you seen the boy who looks like a clay pot?" Clay Pot Boy said, "No, I haven't seen anybody or anything except these rabbits." And he held up the rabbits he had caught. But then when his grandfather looked even sadder, he couldn't tease him anymore. He said, "Grandfather, I'm your grandson. I'm Clay Pot Boy." At first, his grandfather didn't believe him. But when Clay Pot Boy talked of all the things they had done together, then the old man knew this fine-looking young man was his grandson. They returned to the village and told the women of the family what had happened, and a good life began for them. But there was one thing that made Clay Pot Boy sad. He didn't have a father. Often he would say to his mother, "Please tell me, who is my father?" And his mother would say, "You don't have a father." Clay Pot Boy would insist, "I must have a father." But his mother would say, "I've never had anything to do with men. You don't have a father." Finally, Clay Pot Boy said that he was going to find his father. He said he was leaving the village and he wouldn't return until he had done it. The trail he left away from the Pueblo went right past the spring where his grandmother would gather her clay. And when he arrived at the spring, there was a man sitting beside the water. And the man said to him, "Where are you going?" Clay Pot Boy told him, "I'm going to find my father." And the man said to him, "Oh, who is your father?" And Clay Pot Boy said, "I think you are my father." The man looked at him sternly. He said, "I can't be your father." But Clay Pot Boy didn't turn his gaze aside. He said, "I'm sure of it. I'm sure that you are my father." And then the man smiled and he said, "I am your father." And he took Clay Pot Boy down through the waters of the spring, and they arrived at a land below the water. It was a beautiful land with rolling green hills and everything Clay Pot Boy admired. His father would tell him he could have as a gift. And every time he saw a new wonder in that land, Clay Pot Boy would say, "Oh, I wish my mother could see this." Each time he said that, a strange look would come over his father's face. Finally, Clay Pot Boy said that he wanted to return to his own village. So his father took him back up through the waters of the spring. Clay Pot Boy returned home, and he received some very bad news. His mother had become very sick. They gave her every medicine and healing herb. They prayed over her, but she became sicker and sicker, and his mother died. And Clay Pot Boy said to himself, well, there's nothing left for me here. I'll go live with my father's people in the land below the water. He returned to the spring, and his father was waiting for him. They traveled down through the water again. And imagine Clay Pot Boy's surprise when they arrived in the land below the water, and his mother was there. His father explained to him that the land below the water was a spirit world, and to come to that world, his mother had had to die in the world up above. And then a truly happy life began for Clay Pot Boy and his father and mother. And they say that if you ever go to that spring and you sit and you listen carefully, not only with your ears, but also with your heart, mixed in with the bubbling sound of the spring, you can hear the laughter of Clay Pot Boy and his father and mother in that happy world below the water.